You're listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. In this episode, I interview Captain John McMurray and Tony Friedrich from the American Saltwater Guides Association. And if you've been following the podcast at all, you'll hear me refer to what I call the 3 Ps. And that is environmental threats to our fisheries. And to simplify it, I call it the 3 Ps, which is population, policy, and pollution. So example of how population affects our fisheries, overfishing, right? So our fishery stock. Example how policy affects our fisheries. There's a number of ways that it does that. In this episode, we sort of dive into the Magnusson Stevens Act. And then there's also a number of ways that pollution can affect our fisheries, from wastewater to plastic. And in this instance, we talk about how pollution in the form of greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change and how that's changing the migratory patterns of fish and what that means at the state level. So I really learned a lot from John and Tony. Appreciate everything that American Saltwater Guides Association is doing and representing anglers' voices such as mine that believe in conservation and protecting our natural resources such as our fisheries for future generations. So special thanks to John and Tony, and hope you enjoy. This episode of the Sustainable Angler Podcast is brought to you by Turn Flats, Belize's premier saltwater fishing, scuba diving, and marine ecotourism destination. Turn Flats is a charter member of 1% for the Planet, is Green Globe certified, and recently has installed a state-of-the-art off-grid renewable energy system to meet 80% of its energy needs and significantly reduce their carbon footprint. Visit www.tflats.com to book your next fly fishing adventure and sleep well knowing you're supporting a lodge that puts sustainability first.
So I wanted to get things kicked off because I became aware of your organization sometime over the last couple of years, and wanted to see if maybe John, if you wanted to get this started off, with just tell us a little bit more about what y'all are all about and what y'all are trying to accomplish.
Sure. Well, I think this all started a little more than a year ago. I was serving for a New York State senator as his proxy on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And a handful of pro-harvest, pro-extraction party boats went into the senator's office and said, McMurray, he leans too far to the left. He's too conservation-minded. He wants to keep all these fish in the water so the public can benefit. And our businesses depend on pulling a lot of fish out of the water. And of course, the senator, not wanting to lose votes, got rid of me pretty quick as his proxy. If you're not familiar with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, that's what manages striped bass, menhaden, the things that are really important to the guys in this area. What I was thinking is, how could this small group of stakeholders, it's not representative of the fishing public, go in and affect change like this? And, I thought, why don't we have our own industry organization that has that sort of ability to say, well, listen, our jobs depend on having fish in the water, having availability, having abundance. Because for us, that availability and that abundance drives participation. Abundance and availability really is what books trips for me, and what books trips for most of the saltwater fishing guides and most of the charter boat captains. It's not necessarily how many we could kill, but it's availability and how many we could catch. And I'm not saying that taking home fish is not important, but I will say it's not as important as catching fish in general. So the idea was to try to tie an economic benefit to conservation measures, whereas the messaging had always been that the charter party boat industry suffers from conservation measures, but exactly the opposite is true, I think, particularly for our part of the fishing community. And as soon as I got this idea, I called the guy who's the best grassroots organizer I know and has a lot of clout with our industry and in the fishing community in general. I called Tony and I'm like, man, we got to do this because, if we don't, we're just going to keep getting stomped on. And Tony did a lot of the heavy lifting here to get this thing rolling. And, I think at this point we're rolling pretty good, man. We've got a good solid membership. We got a good board and both the federal and state management bodies recognize us and consult with us. And I think we've moved the needle and we've only been at it for about a year.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think just to add a little, which we can get into this a little bit more, but I think especially with for those not familiar with Magnusson Stevens Act, there's I think that it's basically our voice isn't being heard, right? I mean, we believe in conservation of the resource. Magnusson Stevens has been a successful act, and there, I guess, Tony, do you want to shed some light on the Magnusson Stevens reenactment and how our voice is not being represented there?
So, yeah, Rick, I'd happy to do that. John, thank you for the kind words. So, Magnusson Stevens was originally enacted back in the 70s, and it created boundaries 300 to 200 miles off the coast, essentially called the EEZ, and that was essentially foreign fleets from fishing our nearshore waters. And Magnusson is a framework of rules, regulations. It's been reauthorized multiple times, kind of updated to change with how fishing has changed since the 70s. And when you look at the United States versus other countries, it's no shock that people from Europe come here to fish in Florida, for a lot of times for stuff that, like jacks, stuff that really isn't like high on our sport fish list. It's just they don't have anything available over there anymore. It's been fished down unsustainably. It's not coming back anytime soon. And Magnusson, through rules and regulations, has been able to use things like annual catch limits and rebuilding timelines, which means, an annual catch limit is like, this is how many fish you can catch in a year. And if you catch more than that, in a lot of instances, there's paybacks. You have to pay back your part of your quota the next year. Rebuilding timeline is if a fish is overfished, if the stock is depleted, you have to do a rebuilding plan that gets them back to the target levels within 10 years. And it hurts a lot of time as a fisherman, especially in the case right now on the East Coast with several of our fisheries. When they say, "Hey, look, you can't fish for these things for a while," or we're lowering the limit considerably, but we firmly believe in sustainable business through conservation, and we see the long-term benefit of it's. The simplest way to explain it is, are you going to jump into a cold pool, or are you going to dip your toe in and take 20 minutes to ease yourself in? Like we would rather take the hard reductions as quickly as possible and get that stock back up to where it needs to be. Right. Whereas other people would just chip away, and you kind of languish in limbo forever. And Magnusson has a framework that allows us to do that. there's a lot of things that we can address with it. Congress is looking at the last reauthorization was in 2006. Congress is looking at another reauthorization now. The Guides Association was privileged enough to be on a panel about 2 weeks ago with the chairman of Water, Oceans, and Wildlife, Congressman Huffman from House Natural Resources Committee. Our group was one of the panelists, and we were able to help Congressman Huffman build a roadmap, for our fisheries for the next 10 years. And we're going to be engaged in that process as it goes through. And I think the most interesting thing about what John and I have built, and also our board and our chairman and every single person that's helped us out along the way, and there's too many to name. Most interesting thing about what we've built is that our voice is really the first one in the fishing community that's saying, we want these regulations. We want stability.
Right.
We want to know if we put $50,000 into our engines for next year that we're going to be able to take those trips, and people are wanting to go fishing with us because they have a reasonable expectation of catching fish, and that there's value to fish in the water, not just dead on a dock. And the one truth in all of this, Rick, is that we don't fight when there's a lot of fish. We only fight with other groups when the fish populations start to crash. So, we want to make the pie bigger for everyone. We don't want to say this is our slice and you can't have it.
Right.
So that's what John and I are working towards.
Well, and I think it's, what y'all are talking about is, which I wind up discussing whenever I do these podcasts. I did another one recently and we talked about this and, kind of what's happening, around the globe. Well, you got worldwide population growing and there's only a finite amount of resources. So if you're not taking conservation seriously today, it's what's called the tragedy of the commons. It's what happened in Europe, right? It's when the resource is depleted to a point where it can't sustain itself and can't rebound for the foreseeable future, if not indefinitely. And so then that problem is then basically the way that I have to simplify it is there's three threats to fisheries, right? There's what I call 3 Ps. There's population, there's pollution, and there's policy. And so this is a perfect example of whether it's Magnusson Stevens, and I know some other things that I want to get into with y'all and learn about from y'all that y'all are working on. But the Magnusson Stevens Act in particular is a perfect example of what needs to be done in terms of conserving these resources so that they can rebound, because you can't, if you're not planning for the future with even more demand for these precious resources, then the system's failing, right? So anyway, kudos to y'all. That was one of the things that when I came across y'all's organization, I was like, this does represent my voice. This is what I believe. And so what are some other issues on the conservation front that y'all are working on aside from Magnusson Stevens that are that's important and y'all are moving the needle on?
John, you want to take first swing at that and then I'll follow up?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple of clarifying things on Magnusson that I think are worthy of mentioning. So I sat on the council, the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, which is one of the federal management bodies that creates these or actually recommends conservation measures to the National Marine Fisheries Service. But since 2006, which is when the Magnusson Act got real teeth, we've really seen kind of wide scale rebuilding of federally managed fisheries where, and the reason that has happened is because they've implemented annual catch limits and accountability measures if those catch limits are not met. And, back in 1996, we had these rebuilding requirements, but in 2006, we had real teeth in them. So, if a stock was overfished, it had to be rebuilt in no less than 10 years, unless the biology of the stock prevented that from happening. But it also required that this body of scientists set the upper catch limit, whereas before it was kind of the council members playing fast and loose with some of these numbers and kind of avoiding real conservation measures. And the point is, having sat around that table, the discussion always revolved around, well, how do we get around these conservation measures? And the council members had a lot of political pressure from their constituencies to allow overfishing. But what the Magnusson Act did was kind of take that political pressure away from them, because they had to comply with this federal law that requires that A, they prevent overfishing, and B, they rebuild overfished stocks. So with that said, the state management bodies have not had to comply with those same requirements. So what we've seen is kind of a sanctioned overfishing, particularly within the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Now, what we're dealing with right now, and was probably the very first thing on our agenda, is striped bass. And we found out fairly recently that the stock is overfished, and overfishing is occurring, which means, we've gone beyond this spawning stock or under this spawning stock biomass threshold that scientists had determined was a healthy stock, and that means the stock is overfished, and we are currently, and we still are, removing fish at a rate the stock can't sustain. And there's been a lot of political pressure on commissioners to avoid rebuilding and to revisit those reference points, the biomass and fishing mortality reference points, and to lower the bar. And it's mostly come from the pro-harvest, pro-extraction, party charter boat community, and to some extent from the commercial community. But really, this is a recreational fishing problem, not a commercial one. And our spot in the whole debate was to say, well, listen, there's a huge constituency of striped bass anglers, certainly the majority, the big majority. And I'd have to say it's probably around 80 to 90% of that fishery wants conservation. They want those fish in the water. They want to stop the overfishing. They want to rebuild that stock as quickly as possible. And instead of, having kind of that small voice of average Joe anglers, and most of these guys don't want to show up to hearings or take part in the often contentious fishery management process. But they do want conservation. And we kind of represent their voice. And we're also able to come across as a group of folks who make a living from this resource, just like the commercial folks do, just like the extractive party charter boats do. And we need these fish in the water. We need conservation to survive. And, we're hardworking folks too. And a lot of us, we don't make a whole lot of money. We do this because we love it. And we're not, rich guys playing with our food. We're small businessmen. And I think that's been a pretty, that's been a missing part of this whole debate up until recently. I mean, certainly folks knew that we existed, but we hadn't really had a voice. And let's be honest, the other side has been very good at showing up, at making meetings with commissioners, with council members, with their state government folks, and we haven't been good at doing that. And but that's changing rapidly, because we're becoming very good at doing that. And having our guides make those meetings, in Capitol Hill and in their states, I think has absolutely moved the dial on striped bass. There's still a lot of work to be done here, but that's where we are right now. And striped bass is kind of the biggest flagship issue that we're engaged in right now.
Okay. And and Tony, I know you were going to add some to this, but I just have a quick question. I mean, so like when you're striped bass fishery, for example, and you realize that it's being overfished, and you're using your organization, American Saltwater Guides Association, to represent anglers and small businesses that are affected by this, but also want conservation of our fisheries, what are the types of obstacles that y'all face when you're attending these meetings or meeting with representatives? I mean, we're on the same sheet of music. I'm just trying to even wrap my head around someone who's saying, no, it's okay to overfish it.
Okay,
I just don't.
Rick, have you ever seen that video, that hysterical video, the fly fishing parody? If you said the guy's name, I'd remember it in a heart. Hank Patterson. He does it when he's standing in the river explaining to the three guys. He's like, "No, we release the fish," and he's like, "Well, you release them into a cooler and then you eat them?" He's like, "No, we release the fish." Well, why in the world would you want to do that? Sometimes we feel like that, right? Sometimes we're a couple of generations behind freshwater. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying we release everything. I mean, John has built a very robust business on going out, finding bluefin tuna and casting fly and artificial like poppers for them. So, some of those fish, certainly, an angler pays John to take him out and he wants to harvest that fish, and that's fine. People harvest fish in saltwater, I think, more regularly than they do in freshwater. But conceptually, we're a little bit behind, let's say, like your largemouth bass or your trout fishermen in general, stereotypically. So what we face is what we face is explaining why we do what we do. And when you're in a elected official or a bureaucrat's office, and you're talking to them about it, it's just so common sense for guys like us, anyone experienced with like fly fishing in freshwater or, light tackle fishing for bass or whatever. But we have to kind of start from ground zero and say, no, our clients are more interested in the experience. They're rather than filling the cooler, they want to catch as many of these things as possible. Yeah, they may take a couple home, but that's not the measure of their day. So if there was, our clients, if there was a huge school of 30-pound striped bass and it was a catch and release season, so like you knew going out that we are not allowed to kill these fish. We're just going out to catch this massive 5-mile-long school of 30-pound stripers. Our phones wouldn't stop ringing. There would be people lined up to go. Their enjoyment is not based on the ability to take that fish home, and explaining that in a saltwater world to folks is we're getting better at it, but it's experience over filling the cooler. And I think as we age, John and I are certainly not as young as we were 20 years ago. The people that are filling in the ranks, we represent, that 50 and under crowd who understands this and intrinsically gets it. And then there's kind of like an older guard that still feels the other way. So, as far as explaining it to folks, it's actually a breath of fresh air for a lot of them, and it's an attractive and compelling. We're kind of a voice in the darkness, for an elected official who wants to have, hey, look, I improved this on the environment, and that's on my record. We may be the guys who end up supporting that because it helps our cause. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of what we deal with. Sometimes you can go on, Rick.
No, just to say, it does. I mean, that's kind of I certainly have experienced that type of mentality from anglers. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and there is a type of angler that it's not a successful day unless the cooler's full.
Yeah.
And that's just, I don't, so part of what y'all are doing then is also helping to, just create education and awareness about this stuff, go, hey, you don't have to do that. Look, I like to keep a speckled trout and and eat it for dinner just as much as the next guy, but I don't fill my cooler every time I go out,
And that's you're the guy who we represent, Rick. Well, hey, look, we're going to harvest some fish, and you hook a fish deep or something. Conservationists, you should keep that fish. Yeah, you look at a fish and it's not going to make it. Keep it, eat it. It's a blood sport. We understand that. We're on the water a lot, but take as much as you need and leave the rest for somebody else.
Exactly.
So that's where we are.
Hey, Rick.
Nice.
So I just wanted to respond to something you said that kind of hit a nerve. You mentioned, why do people want to overfish? And I think that's a question a lot of people ask. And there's a certain part of the industry that can survive on a depleted stock, or not. So if you go out on a 100-foot party boat, they're going to have access to summer flounder in 60 or 90 feet of water that the small boat guy or the shore guy wouldn't. And sometimes you get these guys after a couple of beers behind closed doors. They'll say, "Well, I don't want abundance because the guys they're not gonna want to fish with me." And maybe that's not entirely accurate for everyone, but the point is that these guys can serve, and certainly the commercial folks who fish with nets can survive on a depleted stock. Now, once you get into the shore-based angler, the surf caster, or the light tackle guy, or the fly fisher who uses the most inefficient gear, and the shore guys, have limited access, and if the fish don't come up on the beach, they don't get them. Now, those are the guys that can't survive on a depleted stock, and subsequently, those are the guys that are the most conservation part of the stakeholder community. And the whole experience thing that Tony talked about, I think he hit the nail on the head. And I don't think it applies to just our clients. I think it applies to everyone. It's if they just want to fill up coolers, go to the fucking fish market. It's orders of magnitude cheaper. So sorry.
Well, not only that, Rick, but if you look at the economic numbers, the Commerce Department just put out that recreational outdoors in the United States is bigger than farming and mining together. It was staggering. It was 2.2% of the GDP. Okay, and it directly correlates to and recreational fishing and boating was the number one component of the outdoor economic engine. So if you look at striped bass, when striped bass stocks plummeted in the 80s, pre-moratorium, we came out of the moratorium in 1995, but right at moratorium, there were 500,000 trips coastwide. People were not going because they weren't there. And if you fast forward to 2006, at the peak of the abundance, there were 10.5 million trips for striped bass.
Yeah,
so
that's crazy.
When you're talking economy, abundance drives economy. It's not just for us; it's for everyone else too. I mean, you know what I mean? It's almost like you're like, man, we're trying to help you too. Don't fight us so hard. Like this is what's best for everyone. Everyone.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the same thing, to give you an example, so I have not fished in y'all's neck of the woods before, but me and some buddies, we go down to Florida every year and fish in the Everglades. And part of that comes with, hey, we usually drive halfway, we get a hotel. We're eating dinners and, on our way down there, we're camping down there, but we're buying things at the store, at the shops and everything along the way. And all of that is helping to drive the economic engine. And so when people come up there to fish stripers, it's got to be the same thing, right? I mean, it's
well, Rick, you bring up an excellent point because we spoke on the phone before. My folks live in Charleston. I'm from the South. The big difference, the biggest difference that y'all don't. It's just a geography thing. You could walk from Cape Charles, Virginia to Maine and have shore access.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at, like, I live on the Chesapeake Bay, there is no shore access here. A father cannot grab his son. He has to go to a state park or something like that. Could literally walk from Cape May, New Jersey to Sandy Hook and fish every inch of the way. And nobody's going to stop you and tell you it's private property. And it's just wide open. So when John's referring to the shorebound anglers, it's staggering. Like over 50% of the striped bass landed were landed by shorebound anglers. You're talking about everyone from billionaire hedge fund managers to, you know, the guy who just started in the electric union and grabs his son after a hard day of work and walks down to the beach. And I mean, he's all in fishing for striped bass for $200 or $300 between the plugs or the bait and the rods. I mean, it's not expensive. It's every man's fish. And the access is just through the roof. You know, y'all don't have that in the South. You just don't. You don't. You have to have a boat. You have to have. So when we're saying these guys are hurt, it is not a small segment of the population at all.
Right.
It's a massive part of the population, and it's the biggest part of the driver. So.
No, that's what I mean. You know, those are huge numbers. I mean, that's crazy. But yeah, you're right about the access. You know, here it's like if you're not on a boat, it's tough to get out and fish. I mean, you get in like a pier or something, but you know, it's not. People aren't walking the shore doing not as much fishing like that here as there is up your way.
I mean, I asked John. John lives in Long Island. I asked John what it's like. I fish Island Beach State Park in Jersey all the time. You get your off-road vehicle pass. Just drive up and down the beach, and you just Assateague Island, Chincoteague Island, all these places. You just people can get their hotel room for the weekend, whatever, walk right out of their hotel, throw a rod off the beach, and you look left and right, and it's sand as far as you can see. So
that's awesome.
You know.
Well, shifting gears just a little bit. I kind of wanted to talk also about, so with what y'all are doing, like, do y'all have any success stories that y'all can share where y'all are helping to move the needle? Because I mean, that's the one thing that I always try to do in these podcasts, is because it's like, a lot of times I'm talking about climate change, or in this case we're talking about a lot of fisheries policy, and it can get a little depressing because you're like, oh my God, it's like, this is almost hopeless. And that's certainly not the case. And so I was hoping that maybe y'all could shed some positive vibes and a positive story of some of the work that y'all are doing.
Want me to take a swing at that, Tony?
Yeah, you go, and then I'll tell you what, we're doing a lot of work. So sit back and kick your feet up, because we're moving the needle on a lot. But John, you can certainly please start.
So the two things that really stand out in my mind when you ask that question, Rick, well, the first is the Huffman listening session and the congressional testimony that I gave the last May. Just the fact that they called on us as part of the American Saltwater Guides Association, that spoke to me as, okay, well, these guys, understand that there's a different perspective here that hasn't been communicated. It hasn't sufficiently been communicated yet. So we need to get these guys in the conversation, and we need to start recognizing these folks. But with that said, on the species specific level, the other thing that really stood out to me was the work that we've done on bluefish, and bluefish are now overfished too. And I'm not going to get into the details on that, but we've initiated, the council has initiated a rebuilding plan, and it's also a reallocation plan too. We're going to look at allocation between commercial and recreational sectors, and as part of that public scoping process, up and down the coast, we had guys going to these scoping meetings and saying, listen, bluefish are the prime example of a sport fish that's not really worth much on the commercial market, for one, and on the recreational market as extracted dead fish too. I mean, it's a sport fish. It's kind of oily. People don't like to eat it, but it's very, very valuable to us swimming around in the water. So that value needs to be communicated in this decision-making process, and it needs to be thoroughly analyzed. Like, what is the value of a live bluefish? Not the value of an extracted dead bluefish, but a live bluefish. And managers heard that, and it's actually part of the initial draft public information draft, that consideration. And I suspect it'll be part of the final amendment. But that whole idea of managing for fish in the water instead of managing for extraction had never, ever made it into a management document. And I thought that was very significant, and that was totally driven by our industry.
Wow. So, I mean, that's pretty incredible. I mean, if you think about
it has much wider implications than just bluefish. I mean, it is everything that we fish.
It sets a precedent moving forward that this matters, and we need to look into this on each decision we make.
Right.
You know, if it fits the bill. You know, if it's because there's such a variety of species in salt water, and the angler attitude towards them can vary greatly. But bluefish, like John said, is just the poster child for these things are. I mean, look, man, we get some big bluefish. We get bluefish over 35 inches. In the fall, those things can be 17, 18 pounds. And we sometimes we're sight fishing for them, and it's fun as heck. And they're nasty and they're mean and they'll bite you and sometimes they'll tail walk. I mean, it is an experience for us when you run across some big bluefish. And nobody, if you're going to eat a bluefish, most people are going to eat the little ones because the big ones are pretty nasty. They're just too oily. So I agree with John. It is a massively significant thing to put that on the radar. I would add, as far as our victories go, it may not seem like it now, but one of the banes of our existence is the reduction fishery for menhaden. Menhaden is a keystone species of our environment. Everything that flies over, swims in, wiggles in the mud, and will eat a menhaden. And there's a company called Cook Aquaculture, a subsidiary. It's a Canadian-owned company. A subsidiary of them is Omega Protein. Omega has 2 ports, one in Reedville, Virginia, a couple in the Gulf of Mexico, and they run a reduction fishery where they purse seine with like 5,000 foot nets. They purse seine these massive schools of menhaden that they get with spotter planes. They put them in the ship's hold. They reduce them down to oil. They turn them into chicken food, cat food, food for aquaculture, which it's Cook Aquaculture. So they're removing a keystone species from the Chesapeake Bay, the nation's largest estuary, the Gulf of Mexico, insane bycatch numbers, and then they're feeding them to diseased Atlantic salmon on the Pacific coast. It's insane. I mean, so we have kind of raised the level of awareness, and I think we're the first. I know, because John and I have several working on menhaden for the better part of like 15 years. I know that we're the only group out there that says, you guys may fish for redfish, we may fish for stripers, but man, we got this in common, and it's Omega, and they're wrecking 3 coasts. And so it's something that ties us with the guides down in Louisiana, ties us with the steelhead fishermen in the Pacific Northwest. And it is not, no matter what Omega wants to tell you, it is not sustainable. As I could talk about it for days, but have we moved the needle on it yet? No. Currently, the menhaden, Omega broke their bay cap quota last year. The decision is at Secretary Ross's desk right now to find them out of compliance. shut the fishery down until they can get back into compliance. But you know, together alone, we were getting our butts kicked here for decades. But together, that's a pretty compelling argument. And I got to tell you, like, that would be a profound change, because you cannot remove. So to give you an idea of the number of fish that they remove, in the lower 48 states, Reedville, Virginia is, I believe, the second or third highest port in tonnage of fish caught, behind, you know, like New Bedford, Mass, which is like the groundfish fishery, the scallop fishery, all this kind of stuff, squid. So it's one species, and it's, I think, the second or third highest tonnage compared to everything else. So, I mean, they're extracting like 400 million menhaden out of the Chesapeake Bay and close inshore waters every year, and saying it doesn't affect our ecosystem, and the Chesapeake Bay being a nursery for everything on the East Coast, in the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast. It's you know, when you tell the story, it's one of those things where, like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, how do they allow this to continue?
Right.
And by kind of creating this group of like-minded people on three coasts, we actually might have a chance of making some pretty profound changes. So that, to me, that's what, it's not just about sport fish and game fish. Like, we kind of look at the whole pie, and you can't remove that much of a forage species, a keystone foundation species, and expect everything to be okay. So I'm pretty proud of that, like, on a personal level. Have we moved the needle? Have we won anything? No. But are we finally all working together? Yes. It's pretty exciting. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I mean, you know, it also brings up another point, is that, you know, just because something's similar to what y'all are talking about with, like, bluefish and menhaden, just because that may not be a popular, you know, I mean, no one's going to go target menhaden, you know, but you know, everything in the water has value and it has a purpose, right? I mean, and if you remove or extract something or overfish it to the point where it can't sustain itself, it has huge implications throughout the ecosystems that we don't even understand. So to just blindly say, well, we're going to basically wipe these guys out of this estuary, I mean, that's just, common sense tells you that's a bad idea.
So weakfish used to be one of the primary fish that we fished for, and John could show you. I could show you too, picture of, you know, of 30-inch weakfish from 15 years ago. And as soon as the menhaden population started getting depleted, you know, the science now tells us that the weakfish population is by far the lowest it's ever been. There were points in time where they wondered if there was enough numbers of fish for biological diversity to be able to say, hey, yeah, the population can still exist, not even sustain itself. Like, they have a future. That's how low the numbers are. And what we're finding through the science is they're growing to about 11 inches and disappearing. And a weakfish is a soft grade fish, you know, pretty similar to your speckled trout. And when they head out of Delaware Bay and Raritan Bay and the Chesapeake Bay, you basically have like this, you know, migration that almost looks like the wildebeest in the Serengeti, that everything starts moving south in the winter, and the predatory fish just park themselves at the mouth of the bays. These juvenile fish, bait fish, everything leave the bays, and there's no menhaden, and the weakfish are the next thing on the menu. And I mean, I know in the Chesapeake Bay, I haven't caught a weakfish over 11 inches in like 16 years. And I used to catch them 10 pounds. So that's just to expound on it's another inshore fish that we just don't have anymore.
Yeah, and actually that kind of brings up something. Tony, you and I had a chance to chat a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that we were talking about was, you know, speaking of like species that you don't see or didn't used to see and everything. Like, aren't y'all starting to see like some species up in that direction that you didn't used to see, like redfish and shrimp and all that?
Everything you just named, and in numbers that you can go out and target them, not just like, oh geez, look, I caught this. That's it.
Yeah, like this is weird, you know. Yeah.
No, like, hey man, we're going cobia fishing today. We're going fishing for giant bull red drum. We're not going fishing for stripers. Those decisions are being made every day. Like in the summertime, that's what people did here. And Virginia just opened up a white shrimp fishery, which is the shrimp y'all have in South Carolina.
Yeah.
So they're actually going to have a commercial trawl fishery for white shrimp. That's how many of them there are.
That's unreal. And so the reason I bring that up is that, you know, climate change does have a stake in all this in terms of affecting our fisheries too. So basically what you have is you have the population growing, right? And everyone wants to extract the resource. There's a finite number of resource, needs to be managed. How do we manage it? By affecting policy, insert American Saltwater Guides Association, by representing anglers such as myself who believe exactly what you believe in terms of the conservation of these fisheries. But while that's all happening, you've got climate change impacting our fisheries, changes in migratory patterns, ocean acidification. So that, I think that climate change, and I know that I think Representative Cunningham from South Carolina wants to introduce climate change as part of Magnusson Stevens to kind of bring this all full circle. But that, you know, that's got to be part of the conversation too, in my opinion.
Well, Congressman Cunningham introduced climate legislation this session. You know, one of the co-sponsors was Congressman Huffman. We've mentioned his name before. So, you know, when you get support for your legislation from the chairman of House of Water, Oceans, and Wildlife, that's a pretty good sign that, you know, there's support for it, because nothing's really going to get past that committee unless they like it. So that was a big thumbs up for Congressman Cunningham. We were very supportive of that bill as a guides association, and you know, we're sure next Congress that's going to come up again. And it's, you know, John will tell you, summer flounder and black sea bass, those biomasses have moved like 200 miles north, John, about, right?
Yeah, and in some cases even more than that. And the way I think we look at climate change right now within the context of our organization is resilience under new stressors, under new climate change and new stressors. And the way you get that resilience is you create abundance. You have to have a lot of fish in the water. That way, when things start to buckle under these stressors, when those fish start to die or move north, you have enough of them around that can evolve to deal with those stressors. And it's a management issue as well with shifting stocks. And Tony mentioned black sea bass. It's probably the poster child, and summer flounder comes in a close second. It's a management issue too. As those stocks shift north, we have to account for that. And you know, that means northern states need some of the quota, and southern states aren't willing to give that up. And in the case of summer flounder, New York in particular has been on the short end of that stick. And it's not really something we fully engaged in yet, this redistribution issue, but it's likely something we probably will in the near future. Just one quick note on menhaden. We kind of moved on from that, but there was a non-compliance finding by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission at our last meeting. 2 meetings ago. When was that, Tony? November.
Well, they actually found them out of compliance at the winter meeting, and I guess that was right around Halloween, John.
Okay, yeah, I said November. I guess it was, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I remember like, oh God, what if I miss Halloween with my kid? Yeah, that was.
So the Secretary of Commerce has to make a decision on whether or not they uphold that compliance finding by the 17th of this month. And one of our members has a client that has direct communication with the Secretary of Commerce. And we've, of course, submitted comments as well. But this could be a major, major win with the Menhaden resource. And in the long term, with the ability of the Commission, of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, to manage fisheries coastally, in a cooperative way, because if they don't uphold this noncompliance finding, you really have to question the management authority of the Commission altogether. So at any rate, there's going to be some big news by the 17th, and that'll be a really big win if it goes our way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge, that would be an absolutely unbelievable win. And I hope you've got my support. That's for sure. Well, hey, what if American Saltwater Guides Association, I do want to make sure I'm mentioning your website. It's saltwaterguidesassociation.com. Anyone listening, how can anyone who wants to show support for what you're doing, how can they get involved with your organization?
Well, they could certainly sign up for our alerts and newsletters on the website. But more importantly, they can make a donation, however small it is, and there's an area on the website to do that. Tony and I and our members go to every single meeting that has any sort of management or any sort of application to our members on the water. And we have to pay to send those guys. And that takes fundraising, unfortunately. It's the worst part of this job, but we need money to operate. So that's how you could have the most impact, I think.
Yeah, and absolutely social media as well. We're very active on Instagram, and on Instagram it's Salt H2O Guides. Facebook is Saltwater Guides Association, American Saltwater Guides Association. And if anything, please donate. There's a big button right when I made sure and put it right in a spot where you can't miss it. You may even accidentally hit it when you're scrolling. We're a C3, so everything's tax deductible. Just be an enormous help to us. And, we want to be a resource. We have a term, we call it peer-reviewed science. And by the time news reaches a tackle shop where they're talking about, the reductions coming up next year or what's going on with this fish, it is peer-reviewed science. So the biggest thing that we hear from people in general is, I never know what to believe. You hear so many different things, and I think we've kind of come out as straight shooters. That, hey, look, this is, and we do it in fisherman talk. We don't do it in nerdinese, marine biology talk. We do it in fisheries language where the common person can read it and go, you know what, I understand that a little better now. So, follow the blog, look at what we're writing. It's going to make sense. And for all those people who kind of feel hopeless out there, just know that, there are people who wake up in the morning every day and just throw everything they have at this stuff. And then they go to sleep and they wake up and they do it again. We want our kids and our grandkids fishing. That's probably the only legacy that John and I would like to leave, is that, 50 years from now, people are still taking their kids by the little son and daughter by the hand and walking down the beach and throwing a plug for stripers. That'd be a pretty cool thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And really the definition of sustainability, right? Meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So I think that's awesome. Is there any? I was going to kind of shift gears and just kind of ask a few sort of rapid fire questions for about fishing, but I do also want to make sure that we cover all areas that y'all like to cover. Before I do that, is there anything else that I maybe missed that y'all like to add?
I'm pretty good. I think it was pretty comprehensive. I don't know how much attention your listeners are going to have if we talk much more, but we can talk forever. I promise you that. Rick.
We could get real wonky on you and start talking about each other.
All right, right on. Well, all right. So I'm going to throw some questions out there. What is John favorite saltwater species on fly?
Well, I'd have to say bluefin tuna, even though we don't catch many. It's definitely the hardest thing, and you get your knuckles anywhere close to that reel, it'll rip a hole in them, man. Those things crush flies, and they take out 250 yards of line before you could get the motor started to chase them. I mean, it's pretty intense, man. But, I kind of grew up on stripers. I'll always love stripers. They're kind of the lifeblood of my business. And there's something extraordinarily handsome about them. I'd have to say stripers are the most important one to me. And they crush poppers too, which is awesome.
Yeah, you can't beat a top water take. So just curious, what type of rod reel combo are you working with on a bluefin tuna? Just because that is crazy.
So I run out and tuna fish. I probably did 75 tuna trips this year, and I always keep 2 14 weights under the gunnels. Now I try to discourage people from booking fly fishing trips because it is really tough. And most of the bluefin we capture on large and poppers with pretty big spinning gear. But if the opportunity arises, you get them boiling behind the boat or you get them blitzing. It's good to have those 14 weights there. Now, I know they make 16 weights now. Occasionally I have guys bringing them on the boat, but man, they're like throwing a broomstick. The 14 weight isn't much fun.
Oh, yeah, I can't. I've never thrown anything over a 12 weight, so this thing's got to be pretty.
The reel is the size of a hubcap too.
Right.
Because you got to have 650 yards of back. I mean, it's like John said, you blink and they just dumped 100 yards.
Yeah.
It's nothing crazy. You've ever caught.
I bet that's exciting as hell.
The first one is after that, you're kind of like, I'm done. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm good. I never want to do it again.
Yeah. All right, Tony, what is, same question, favorite saltwater species on fly?
I think I've spent the better part of my career fighting for stripers, and it's not the strongest fish. It's not, it's not the smartest fish. It's not like tricking a bonefish. But like John said, there's just something about them. We have a dominant year class. Every about 4 or 5 years, stripers have a really good spawn. And it's almost like where I live, this is where the juveniles stay until they're about 6 or 7 years old. And you watch them grow up. You see a lot of 12-inch stripers, you just kind of look out and you're like, man, 3-4 years, this is going to be fun. And there's so much to so many people. I got to say, stripers and getting a big one in shallow water is something pretty special. Getting a big one in deep water is fun, but they fight different. But they really, and if you can get them in cold, shallow water, it's something every diehard fisherman should experience. Because it's really a badass fish. I can't really compare them to anything else. It's a striper's a striper.
That's awesome. All right, so we've got bluefin, but both in agreement on striper. And now, since we're talking about responsible fishing, right? I don't need to fill my entire cooler. But what are some of your favorite species to throw on the grill or in the oven from your neck of the woods?
Oh man. Well, I wouldn't throw it on the grill or the oven, but these winter bluefin that we get, the ones that we're catching in December, they're all fattened up for that trek south. And the 55, 60-inch fish, like $1.25, their belly meat is like butter, man. It's like marbled with fat. It is so freaking good. Like, it's out of this world good. It's not something you'd ever be able to get in a restaurant here, but it's out of this world, man.
Yeah, there's really nothing better than a tuna. I will tell you, this will probably make you blush, but northern snakeheads have exploded where I live. And it is the ugliest, nastiest. Yeah, it's an invasive species, and it's also besides the bluefin tuna John just described, it's the best eating fish in the world, hands down. It's better than a pompano.
Really?
It's unbelievable. You can't cook it wrong. It's just like this firm, super sweet white meat. You get a ton of fillet off a decent sized one. It's so long. And it's an invasive species that's, definitely impacting our marsh environment. So it's, you kind of don't feel bad, right? Like, I don't know what it would take for me to kill a striper right now with the overfish status and everything. I don't think I could do it until they recover. But
Right.
I'll kill a snakehead. And the other thing we do early summer flounder fishing in the spring. When they're just coming in and they're coming right off the continental shelf in that cold water. And, you eat that thing the same day and the meat's like translucent. Like, you could never get that in a restaurant ever. And it like melts in your mouth. Like John says, it's just unbelievable.
That's awesome. Snakehead fish. I did not expect that to come out of your mouth, but you heard it here. Well, guys, I want to thank you both for your time today. I appreciate everything that American Saltwater Guides Association is doing. You certainly represent my voice as an angler, so thank you. Anyone listening, again, go to saltwaterguidesassociation.com and help make a donation to these guys who are out there fighting for our voice, because I certainly do appreciate it. And if there's anything that I can do to help y'all just let me know.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. Special thanks to Tony and John from American Saltwater Guides Association. Also to our sponsor for this episode, Turnip Flats. The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify. Do us a favor, give us a like, a follow, rating and review. That really helps the show out a lot, so that we can continue to educate and create more awareness about these environmental threats, but also share these inspiring solutions and stories on the show. Also, we recently created a YouTube page, or a YouTube channel, I should say. So if you want to subscribe to that, that'd be great. And thanks again for your time.